I love me some video game boss fights, and it's a crime that it took me so long to play a very highly acclaimed game that is basically known for consisting of nothing but kick-ass boss fights, and it might just be one of the biggest cases of horrible first impressions turning into a genuine love I've ever had with a game. This is Shadow of the Colossus. All I had ever heard about this game was that it was amazing. A masterpiece of spectacle and badassery. So I was pretty excited to pop this into my console and see what all the hype was about. And what did I think after fighting the first few Colossi? This kinda sucks. But let's back it up a bit. What even is Shadow of the Colossus? Well, this game opens with a very long cutscene of the main protagonist riding a horse through admittedly beautiful scenery. He finally arrives at his destination and speaks to a mysterious voice. This is basically just where you get your exposition as to what's going on, which is that the protagonist, Wander, is trying to perform a ritual to revive a girl that he clearly cares a lot for. Performing this ritual consists of traveling to this forbidden land and defeating all 16 Colossi that reside in it. The game briefly teaches you its very simple mechanics and says, good luck, go kick some ass. That's it. From then on, with a couple short story-related cutscenes sprinkled here and there, you go from Colossus to Colossus, guided by the light of your sword, and do indeed kick some ass. So why were my first impressions so bad? I mean, I love this idea. The game is focused on what it wants to do and doesn't try to do anything else. And what it wants to do is have you fight some motherfucking Colossi. My initial grievances came with the controls. Yeah, that sounds pretty devastating. I mean, you can have all the good ideas you want, but if your game feels like shit to play, it's not gonna be fun, and it's not gonna be liked. And this game felt pretty shit to play, I'm not gonna lie. The dodge roll is awkward, platforming is awkward, riding your horse is awkward, which should be one of the most fun things to do, but Shadow of the Colossus says no. Everything feels kinda slow, and the physics are floaty. I don't know how to properly describe something like this unless you've played it for yourself, and I didn't know if I was ever gonna be able to get used to it, but I was very much proven wrong. See, another reason why I didn't have the greatest first impressions were not only because of the controls, but the overall pace of the game. Like, my expectations were that it was gonna be action-packed, and I had a more fast-paced experience in mind. Shadow of the Colossus is not fast-paced. This, combined with the clunky, janky controls, weren't really giving me the best vibes. I defeated the first Colossus and went, that was it? Like, you slowly climb around it, and when you get to where you're supposed to be, you do nothing but stab into it a bunch of times, slowly whittling its health down. That's not exactly riveting gameplay. All of this sounds absolutely terrible, and that's certainly how it felt at first, but when I hit Colossus 5, I was starting to understand what the game was really about. I literally had that Danny DeVito moment. I get it. No, the game's not fast-paced. Yes, the controls are a little weird, and yes, the Colossi will constantly try to shake you off, rendering you completely unable to do anything while you slowly watch your grip gauge dwindle and a sense of panic starts taking hold. But these all play into its identity. Wander is just a guy trying to save a girl. Not a warrior, not someone remotely qualified to take on this monumental, or should I say colossal, task. Just a guy who's way in over his head. I kinda had the realization that desperately trying to hold on to these things for dear life is a unique and thrilling feeling in and of itself, and I think that's part of the main strength of the game. Don't get me wrong, the controls still suck, but to be fair, not to get all armchair game dev here, it is reflective of Wander's complete incompetence when it comes to fighting. It feels very much reminiscent of that fantasy adventure trope where an average everyday protagonist stumbles upon supernatural monsters or something, and bumblefucks his way around fighting them. So yeah, he's not gonna know how to dodge roll, and yeah, he is gonna be panicking and flailing every step of the way, and the game really does do a good job of making you feel that. However, I do feel like there's gotta be a way to show that other than just genuinely making the controls dog shit. I'm not really gonna defend that, I just wanted to point out that what I think they were going for is kinda cool. But back to the real strengths. I did manage to get used to the feeling of this game's movement, and I will say it was really nice actually learning how to work with the controls and not against them. and once I got good at that, I was able to focus more on the other aspects of the game, and that's where the realization hit. The game is breathtaking and thrilling at the same time. Yeah, it's relatively slow paced, but I think it plays into that really well, and the most gratifying moments in these fights are almost always when you finally reach that weak point and just tear into them. And again, it is a struggle to stay on. That's where a lot of the high intensity comes from. You have a grip gauge that slowly depletes while you're holding onto things, and you need to constantly be managing it lest you get flung off. You can't stab into the Colossus unless you have a good grip, aka when the damn thing isn't shaking around like a gas station weather balloon. There are cues you can use to know when you're able to do certain things, and once you realize what these are, things become more manageable. One of the biggest ones I would say is knowing that Wanderer is able to stab again when he's got both hands and feet gripping the Colossus. It seems obvious when I say it out loud, but trust me, keeping an eye out for this to get another stab in as soon as possible really helps. If you're still not quite sure or you can't see Wanderer that well, you can still know if it's working by checking to see if the attack is charging up in your grip gauge. The controller also rumbles when you're charging up an attack, but it also rumbles every time the Colossus so much as sneezes, so I never found it a very reliable cue. This game is highly intense in its own unique way, and the game wastes no time just throwing you to the wolves. The fights can be a bit lengthy, especially if you don't really know what you're doing yet, and that's just due to the nature of the game. These Colossi are meant to be an endeavor, something massive that you manage to take down. I've really grown to love the feel of the combat and the fights themselves. Some of them can be a bit gimmicky, and there are definitely ones where the challenge comes more in figuring out how to make the Colossus vulnerable in the first place, rather than fighting the thing itself. Like, once you figure out the puzzle, they kinda just die. Some of them have you doing said puzzles multiple times to pad it out a bit, which is even worse. These are the ones that are generally my least favorite in the game, and that kind of boss design in general is something I've never really been a big fan of. Like Colossus 13, where you have to shoot the sacks to get it to lower down, and once you destroy one of its 3 weak spots, it burrows into the ground, forcing you off and making you repeat the cycle 2 more times. Colossus 7 does something similar, where once you take out 2 of the electric rods on its back, it goes deep underwater again indefinitely, making you go back up for air and needing to lure it back up again. These aren't the most fun. On the flip side though, some of these Colossi are bangers, most of them actually. Again, my love for the game really started developing with Colossus 5, and I really didn't think I was going to like this one too much since I never tend to be a fan of aerial bosses, especially in a game where you are basically stuck on the ground, but all you have to do is stand on a platform and it'll dive at you, letting you grab onto it. And let me tell you, does this thing fly? This is where I really experienced and appreciated the intensity of just hanging on for dear life. It's a relatively short fight, but it's thrilling. Colossus 15, I think, has the best of both worlds when it comes to puzzle solving in these fights and still providing a good challenge, even when you do manage to get on the thing. You have to find a way to get to higher ground, and when you climb up above it and drop down onto it, the sheer size of this thing and the relatively minimal climbable areas it has, plus the amount of weak spots you have to hit, all provide a good fighting experience on top of the gratification you get from figuring out how to actually get on it. And even if you fall off or replay this fight in the future, it doesn't take that long at all to get back on it once you know how to. I think this fight is just so cool in so many ways. Part of what makes these fights even cooler is the stellar soundtrack. It's a very cinematic sounding soundtrack that fits the game incredibly well. Something I hardly even registered before writing this is that there's literally no music at all when you're in the overworld. It's just you, your horse, and the big open terrain. There's music during cutscenes, and of course, music during the Colossus fights, and I think the stark contrast of this makes the fight stand out even more. You know you're in a fight simply by whether you're hearing music or not. That, and there's a short cutscene every time one starts, but then you hear the music for the first time in a while, and you know it's on. The music generally starts off pretty tame, and only starts soaring after you, for lack of a better phrase, do a good thing. Like expose a weakness or grab onto its body, and then you really feel the hype. It feels so cool just clinging onto these behemoths as the music roots for you. This is genuinely one of the coolest soundtracks I think I've heard in any game I've played. So I've talked a lot about fighting these things, but not really about how to. So let's go over some mechanics. For starters, Wanderer has a sword and a bow. He can stab with the sword, shoot with the bow, and also climb things. Hold on, I seem to have misplaced the rest of the explanation. Huh? That's it? Yeah, that's it! When you stab while holding onto a surface, like when you're on a Colossus, you can hold down to do a charge stab, the strength of which is indicated on your grip gauge, which I talked about earlier. And that's pretty much the entire combat system and moveset. New Game Plus aside, there are no unlockables, nothing new you get, no new mechanics that are discovered or introduced. It is this bare bones. And let me tell you, that rules. I'm dead serious. This is not a bad thing whatsoever. I actually think this makes the game a lot more interesting in a less is more kind of way. Again, this game knows exactly what it wants to be and doesn't try to be anything else. It gives you some basic mechanics, kicks you out into the world, and says good fucking luck. These bosses all feel unique because they kind of have to be. The limitations of the combat system shift the focus less on wonder and more on the badass Colossi themselves. So they have to be awesome, or else it just wouldn't work. That is what the game is about, after all. And I really think it delivers on this. One of the highlights of my first playthrough of the game was just looking forward to what the next Colossus had in store, not knowing at all what to expect. I loved that excitement. Now technically there are some collectibles in the form of fruit trees and lizard tails you can find throughout the world, which very slightly increase your health and grip gauge respectively. These don't really matter much in normal play since the increase is so minimal and every Colossus you defeat increases your stats anyway, so just by doing multiple playthroughs, they're going to be increasing a lot. I really only found myself deliberately hunting for these when I only had a few trophies left and they still weren't maxed, so whenever I was near a fruit tree I'd grab some. Lizards are a bit more annoying and I spent about an hour or two at the very end just hunting them down to finally max out the grip gauge. Only the lizards with blue tails can increase your max grip gauge, and you need to shoot the tails off by hitting them right where they meet the body of the lizard and then collect them. Your stats and items do carry over to New Game Plus, and let's talk about that. In New Game Plus, you can challenge each Colossus in a time attack whenever you want by kneeling in front of their statue at the main shrine. You have to be like really close to them. You can't bring any items in a time attack, and you start with the minimum health and grip gauge, but the more Colossi you defeat in time attacks, the more these will increase as well, being totally separate from your main world health and grip gauge. Beating these time attacks in the required amount of time will unlock certain items, and these items are an absolute game changer. They make future playthroughs a lot more interesting. This is everything from armor, more powerful swords, different types of arrows, a map of all the fruit trees, a parachute you can use to hover and negate any fall damage. It's awesome. There's a set of items unlockable through hard mode time attacks and another set through normal mode time attacks. So you'll need to make another New Game Plus in the same save file and change the difficulty before doing all the time attacks again to have all the unlockable items at once. I honestly love the way this is done. Not only does it make future playthroughs more interesting than just staying with the bare bones abilities for every single playthrough, but it's honestly so satisfying getting these after having basically nothing for so long. I seriously felt like a kid opening presents on Christmas morning every time a new item dropped, like, ooh, what's this one gonna be? There's really only one major criticism I have for this game other than the wonky controls, and that's the complete and total lack of a fast travel system. It takes quite a long time to traverse the world, and at first it's not a big deal because it's all so new, and I kinda liked exploring and trying to find my way to each new Colossus. It's genuinely a pretty big map, but in future playthroughs, once I pretty much knew the map's layout and where I was going, well, there's only so many times I can drudge through this without wanting to stick my hand down a garbage disposal just to feel something. There's genuinely nothing to do in this massive world other than go to the next Colossus. It really feels like fast travel should have been a New Game Plus thing. There are even shrines scattered throughout the map that act as save points. It would have been perfect if you could just fast travel between these as well, but alas, you're forced to trek everywhere. As for the story of this game, I mentioned the setup, but what actually happens when you defeat all 16 Colossi? This is approaching the spoilery part of the video, which includes the last Colossus and the ending of the game, so skip to this timestamp if you want to avoid that. I wish I had better things to say about the last Colossus. I mean, there's very minimal story here, so it would have been difficult to make the final encounter super meaningful, and so it kinda just ends up feeling like Colossus 16 rather than a true final boss. I mean, it's much bigger and a generally longer fight, but that's about it. I don't know what else I was expecting though, so we'll roll with it. The entire first part of the fight is just running up to the thing in the first place while it shoots projectiles at you, so you need to constantly be taking cover and entering these tunnels just to protect yourself. Once you finally reach the Colossus itself, you spend some time just platforming up its armor. Only after these sections does the fight meaningfully start, and everything after this is genuinely pretty cool. You have to keep hitting these minor weak spots to get it to react in a certain way in order to climb onto a new part of it. Eventually, you reach the head and kill the thing. This last part really does feel like a test of your skills, with the puzzle solving and difficult platforming as you go from back to hand to arm to other hand to shoulder to head. And once it's defeated, boy does some crazy shit happen. It turns out the voice that's been directing Wander to kill all these things is actually a great evil that was imprisoned on this island and split into 16 pieces to prevent it from ever awakening again. These pieces are, of course, the Colossi, and with the corruption of all 16 of them coursing through Wander's body, this being, known as Dorman, rises. Now this sounds like the setup to a real final boss fight, but it's not. These people who, well, I don't really know who they are, but they're clearly civilians of the outside world who have some sort of connection to this island, arrive just in time to see Dorman take over Wander's body and take his true form. You actually get a short gameplay section where you get to play as Dorman fighting the people, which is pretty cool. He's sluggish and awkward as shit though. It's entirely scripted, and after some time, the next cutscene will play. The people are able to activate the trap that I assume was used to seal Dorman in the first place, and he's slowly sucked into it. And you get this heartbreaking gameplay scene of Dorman fading, while what little is left of Wander tries desperately to escape as he attempts to reach the girl he's been trying to save. But of course this too is scripted, and you have no choice but to be sucked into the pool, and all is quiet once more. That's not quite it though. The ritual actually worked, and the girl is revived, but she missed everything that happened, and she's kinda just trapped on this island now. And then during the credits, she picks up a baby from the pool that is probably supposed to be Wander for whatever reason, and that's the end of the game. I'm not even going to try to make sense of this last part. It's a dreary ending, which does very much fit the overall tone, and I honestly really liked this. Obviously the story is not the main draw of this game, but I was surprised at how much this hit. The atmosphere of the game really makes this work. There's not meant to be much character building or anything, so I don't really have too many thoughts beyond this. It's a pretty cool premise, and definitely more than I was expecting, which was practically no story at all, so it was a pleasant surprise. And that wraps up Shadow of the Colossus. This ended up being a bit shorter than I thought it would be, since I feel like I had a lot to say about it, but the game itself is a lot simpler, and that's not a bad thing. It had exactly what it needed to have, and framed everything in a way that really made it feel unique. It's dreary, and thrilling, and lonely, and intense. It really is an experience you can only get by playing it for yourself, so if you had a similar experience to me in the beginning and dropped it because of that, or if you haven't played this before at all, I hope you feel compelled to give it another chance, or play it for the first time, because it grew on me in a way that no other game really has before. And that's all I have to say. If you liked the video, make sure to hit all those wacky YouTube buttons, subscribe, bell, like, yada yada. Thank you so much for watching, hope you stick around, and I'll see you in my next endeavor. Peace.